Ah, there are 31 associate professors within humanities. So if you say this is a non-named humanities associate professor, well, if 4 of them have spoken on the record, and that leaves 27. That's not that hard to then run now that we have Chat GPT, where we don't just run our mission statement through. It's possible to back engineer who it is, who says what. This is why we need to take a stance and make sure that people can speak without fear. We, a university is impossible when we can't think and talk without fear of losing our jobs, of being hauled into endless disciplinary proceedings. We need to be able to get things wrong, and then we correct each other. And I see our fearless CMC colleagues are here. This is remarkable. Thank you to. Sure. I will. I will hold the floor. This feels like we're. We we are committed to making clear this is an emergency. We have a small window of opportunity to oppose and stand up against the authoritarian regime that is trying to consolidate its power, that is trying to beat everyone into obedience, that is trying to instill fear in all of us, that we have to worry about election integrity. It is not clear, it is not given that we have the time to wait for 2026 to elect, make sure we fix it in the elections. We need to stand up now. But the good thing is also one thing that we learned as our acting president, yesterday sent us an email naming Mahmoud Khalil and Mohsen Madabi by name, finally. Well, guess what? When we tell them loudly what they need to do, they do here. Sure, it comes late, but it also tells us it makes a difference when we stand up and speak out and we don't let up. And we sometimes the people in charge have lost their way. So we will hold them to account. And we are standing up for this university. Yes, wish Columbia had led the way. Wouldn't that have been amazing? If when that first letter came, they said, hell, rule of law still means something here. There's a process. You didn't follow it. See you in court. It would have been great. We're grateful to Harvard. I spent a year there on a Fulbright, so I'm very pleased to see. I'm also pleased every time I check the AAU statement. There are more and more and more university presidents signing on because we recognize, yes, for smaller institutions, especially ones that have, right, we are not embedded, entangled. We are not embedded, entangled in the same ways with the community. We have different student bodies, different families. Same with the CUNYs. We should all be in solidarity. We should be in solidarity with the high schools, the junior high schools. We should think about how we can extend collective self-governance to the school system, as our colleague Ansley Erickson taught us. This was at one point in the 60s something that actually was a model. And I am sure people I see our amazing CUMC colleagues, They can probably teach us a lot also about the young lords and all kinds of amazing initiatives, activism, and really work on institution building that the city has from the ground up, from community driven, has a history. And Columbia doesn't need to be a terrible neighbor to Harlem. We need to open the gates. Harlem is part of us. We need to be part of Morningside and Harlem. We can't. We lose so much. We have a responsibility, but we also stand to learn so much from the wisdom and knowledge, deep knowledge that is there. So I don't know. I have taken a long time. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to the amazing organizers and everyone.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. We learned so much from you. I'm going to hand it to Professor Elwin Wu. And
This one?
live stream hopefully is working.
Is it this one? Okay, I thought it was a lapel or a clip. Okay. Well, okay. Thank you. Big round of applause to Yannick team. 2 hours. Thank you. 2 hours, round of applause. We owe you a lot. Very wise words, very inspirational words. It's my pleasure and honor to now introduce our next set of speakers from CUMC and CUMC Stand Up. So please, I welcome you to the soapbox. This is for you. It should be good.
So we have to keep
This will go to the live stream. This is just for local amplification. Okay. Just like up. You'll find out.
Could I get this? I just want to switch that on.
Yeah, let's get this all out. Just put it on top.
Put it on top.
Yeah. I don't know who's that.
Okay. I think it's okay for the moment.
All right.
Get started. So I think that this is a transition between the night owls and the early morning people, the early birds. So I want to welcome you all and say good morning, and the early bird dogs. So my name is Sharon Schwartz, and I'm going to be here with my colleagues, Melanie Wall and Catherine Keys. And we are here to support the goal of the Speak Out, which is to reiterate our 6 demands to ensure academic freedom and student safety. So I just want to first outline what we are going to be doing in the hour that is allocated to us. So we're going to start with the demands because that's what the Speak Out is all about. Then we are going to talk to you specifically about funding cuts. We're going to describe what that means in general, what the impact is in general on our departments. Then we're going to talk about what it means to us personally. And then we have affidavits from our students to tell what it means to them. Finally, we want to make a connection to society, why people outside of academia should care about these federal funding cuts. Then we want to make sure that we connect what's happening in the university to what's happening to our democracy in general. And we're going to do that by reading from a book called On Tyranny that I suspect many of you are familiar with. So I'll just start by reading the demands. And I hope I said that we are talking for ourselves and we do not represent the university. So, demand number 1, stand up for our higher education. We call on the Board of Trustees and the President of Columbia University to formally propose and help establish a mutual academic defense compact among all members of the Association of American Universities. The request is rooted in the basic principles of defense of academic freedom, institutional integrity, and
for Sharon and Melanie as well, who's a faculty in our T32, that was in psychiatric epidemiology training. So in our grant, we outline how we would train people, what we're doing that's exciting, why we're at the forefront of training the next generation of psychiatric epidemiologists, and why that's important. And we have at Columbia, for over 50 years, successfully competed to receive funding to train doctoral students and postdocs in psychiatric epidemiology. I was one of those students. So over 20 years ago, 20 years ago, I was lucky enough to apply for and receive this funding in psychiatric epidemiology. At the time, I was a master's student at the Mailman School of Public Health, and I took Bruce Link's psychiatric epidemiology class. I was never more inspired, and I knew that taking that class made me realize that that was the career I wanted. Everything kind of locked into place when I took that class and realized this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. This is what I want to commit to helping others do. And this is the type of research I feel that can contribute to society. So in the mid-2000s, I applied for the psychiatric epidemiology training program and was lucky enough to be awarded
You weren't just lucky, you were clearly on a great trajectory.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Wall. I was on such a clearly great trajectory that I received the funding. And I still remember the day that Sharon Schwartz walked into my office and told me that I had received approval to join the psychiatric epidemiology training program. And so for 5 years, I received that NIH funding and trained with Sharon Schwartz. Melanie Wall was not at Columbia at the time, but I would have trained with Melanie Wall had she been at Columbia. I trained with Ezra Susser, Debbie Hassan, and many other people who were involved in the psychiatric epidemiology training program and received a world-class education at Columbia funded by this NIH T32. After that, I started on the faculty at Columbia University soon afterwards, and really in a full circle moment in 2019, I became the director of that T32.
See,
Thank you
I
so
told
much.
you it was a great trajectory.
Yeah, thank you. So for the last 6 years, I have been the principal investigator of the psychiatric epidemiology training program at Columbia University, and it has been among the greatest professional joys of my life to be able to shepherd this program with my colleagues, to see scholars go from kind of the initial start of an idea to a fully formed dissertation that contributes to the literature, to see our postdoctoral students who have training in diverse and wide-ranging areas come to Columbia and really understand how epidemiology works, and to be able to integrate their expertise into the kinds of work that we do that creates a synergy that really shapes the field. And I want to especially point out that 2 years ago, we had the 50th anniversary of continuous NIMH funding for this T32. And for our 50th anniversary, we had an event where we brought together the 188 people that we have trained with NIMH dollars for 50 years to celebrate not only the legacy of this program, but if you think about the branches that have come from it, every single person that we've trained in psychiatric epidemiology at Columbia has gone on to train other people over the many decades of this program. So even though we have trained 188 people, there are thousands of scientists, both in this country and in many others, who have benefited from the training that we have provided at Columbia University for 50 years. A good return on investment. Thank you, Melanie. And I just want to point out, too, the types of projects that we do and why they are important to society at large. And I'll just speak about my own research program and some of the things that we're focused on. I study trends in outcomes such as alcohol consumption, We've been told for many decades by the alcohol industry that moderate alcohol consumption is good for your health. For example, having a drink a day. Careful scientists over decades, including myself, have now done the research to show that moderate consumption, no amount of alcohol consumption is good for our health. I'm so sorry to say. And we've done that research despite decades of pushback from a very profitable industry. We've done a lot of it using NIH funding to demonstrate that no level of alcohol consumption is good for your health. And now we're poised to be able to provide recommendations to Americans for dietary guidelines. How should you be eating and drinking every day? It is important that we have independent scientists doing that work because there are profitable industries that want to sell a product that is addictive and bad for our health. I'm also working on a range of other topics that are salient to Americans, such as things like social media. How much should we be consuming? How is it affecting our health? How is it affecting the health of children? The work that I do is to track how people are using social media and to understand both the benefits and the harms to human health and mental health, especially among young people, of using these new products. And again, it's really critical that we have independent scientists doing this work, because there's another example where you have a very profitable industry that profits off of us believing that social media is a public good. So that's just some of the many, many research projects that those of us in the psychiatric epidemiology training program at the Mailman School of Public Health and at the university more broadly are doing, using NIH dollars and using the training that we've received over these decades in order to engage in this work. So I'm going to now turn it to Sharon, who will move us forward.
So Carrie was talking about what this training grant meant to her, what it meant to society through the research. And I also wanted to reflect on what this PET grant meant to me. I'm sorry if I'm getting emotional, but it's a particularly difficult time for us because the person who started this grant, Bruce Dorenwind, who made this grant, made it what it was, died a month before the grant that he had put in place in 1972 was terminated. Not for cause, as you know, but through the weaponization of anti-Semitism and just the authoritarian goals of our current administration, government administration. So Carrie told you that we study things that matter for society. But what was amazing about our training program and other training programs is that it teaches you how to do that work with integrity, with care. And this happens through, first of all, freedom of speech within the program. So I just want to put some, meat on the bones. I'm a vegan, it's not a very good analogy, but I want to give you a sense of what that means. And I'll tell you this from one of my favorite memories from being a PET fellow. And I must say that there's a lot of, us who don't ever want to leave the training program. It becomes our intellectual home. So I was a postdoctoral fellow in the program in 1988. And I stayed on, I worked for my mentor, and then I became the training coordinator of the training program since the 1990s. And as things would have it, I now have Kerry as my boss. So the training coordinator tries to keep up the spirit that Bruce Dorenwind brought to the training program. So this is an example of how we were trained to speak our mind. So way back, and you could, you know, when I remember when I was still a student, a colleague of mine actually was in the program with me at that time, Ilan Meyer and I wrote this paper that challenged the current paradigm of how people thought about disparities research. My mentor, Bruce Dornwin, was the creator and the cheerleader and the scientist who studied this paradigm. But Ilan and I wrote this paper that was challenging to it. And because we're having actually today, this afternoon, we're having a memorial service for Bruce Dornwin, I went back and looked at that paper. I was kind of shocked at how chutzpahdik we were. I tried to find a good definition of that. You know, we were, I don't know, arrogant, maybe. We took a real chance, but we gave this pet seminar challenging our mentor. So as is our tradition in the program, there's a long question and answer period after it. Many people asked questions, but Bruce Dornwin was silent. So the other colleague who was running the session looked at him and said, "Bruce, do you have anything you want to say?" And Bruce looked sternly and said, "I have already told Ilan and Sharon how wrong they are in their conclusions about this paper." But then he went on to have an amazing conversation with us, discussions with the fellows about our work. It was engaging, enlightening, a little painful, but at the end of it, I remember that the fellows all said this was one of the best pet seminars ever. And why was that? Because they saw that their mentor, the head of this program, could treat the students like valued colleagues, worthy interlocutors, to have real conversations with them. And also because we knew that any criticism was directed towards our work and not towards us. So this notion to be free in your expression started there from the ground up. And it's a tradition that we try to hold on all the time. So that was one important lesson of the training program. The other important lesson of the training program was that we learn from science, but science is not fixed. Science is not static. You can't just follow the science. Rather, science is a process. You start with a theory, but then you have to test that theory. We use risky tests, as one of my other mentors, Bruce Link, called it. You try to interrogate what you do and test it out to the best of your ability. And when I was working for Bruce Dornwin, I got to see this in action. So I was doing data analyses for him, and we had spent a long time on these analyses, and we finally got the data. And lo and behold, the data did not support his hypothesis. I didn't know what to do. I was like, how can I tell this to Bruce? So we double checked our work. We triple checked our work, but to no avail. So the person who was doing the work and I, actually, when we went to the next meeting, we lied to Bruce and we told him we didn't finish the analyses yet because we couldn't bear it. But of course, that was just postponing the inevitable. So finally, we had to tell him the results. So when I did that, I timidly said to him, "So Bruce, how do you feel about this?" And he said to me, "Feel about it, Sharon? Feel about it? I feel educated." And this was like an amazing moment that told me, oh, this is how it works. You make a theory, you make a hypothesis, you test it, you try over years, and sometimes it works out, and sometimes it doesn't work out. And that's how science works. So in this training program, Bruce set the tone. Over the years, we've had other people leading the program, Bruce Link, Ezra Susser, and now Kerry Keys. And we try to maintain this tradition. It's not easy. The world doesn't always work like that. But Bruce also taught us another important lesson. He was extremely, one might say, stubborn and had perseverance. If you did your homework and you argued with your colleagues about your work and you felt convinced that you knew the right way to do something, the better way to do it, then Bruce would stand up to that regardless of what other people said, even if he was the lone voice for that position. So the training program, to me, means so much. That intellectual home that teaches us about how science is hard but needed for society, as Kerry was saying, that you need to do science right, you need to be humble about your work, but then you need to stand up for what you think is right. So, Bruce, just thank you for everything and for making this happen. And so when it gets defunded, terminated, and I see that other students along the way won't have the opportunity of this training, it's really a sad situation. But that's our feeling. Kerry and I grew up in Pet. That's how we feel about it. But what also matters is, what do the current fellows feel about it? So we reached out to the fellows, and some of them provided us with testimonials about what it meant to them about this training program being cut off. So I just want to read some of their testimonials. I'll share this with Kerry. So the first one said, the PET, and it's kind of interesting that the acronym for the program, Psychiatric Epidemiology Training, is PET. And somehow it just feels warm and cozy like the training program is. We could have had a worse acronym. Anyway, so the PET T32 allowed me to continue in a program that I could not have afforded otherwise. In addition to this, it has allowed me to continue interrogating vital questions regarding mental health and trauma, a realm of experiences my community has had so much personal exposure to. The funding for programs such as this is not only vital for students to continue pursuing the means for higher education, but it provides students the ability, tools, and resources to continue asking vital questions that benefit us all as a society and as human beings. The greatest demonstration of love and care in our communities is the willingness of students to dedicate our lives to the questions that they believe will help steer a healthier future for all. The loss of the PET T32 was not only a devastating loss for me personally, as someone who has sacrificed so much to come to Columbia, but is an equally devastating symbolic loss for the under-resourced and marginalized who depend on students who see it within them to honor the importance of the lives, health, and happiness of others. A second student said, I was devastated when I found out that the PET T32 had suddenly terminated. Not only did the program support me financially, and thus it was extremely stressful to find out my funding had vanished, but it most importantly supported my academic research. The PET T32 has been instrumental in shaping me into a thoughtful and rigorous epidemiologist. Through this program, I have had the opportunity to work with and study under some of the most renowned researchers in the field of psychiatric epidemiology. Losing the program is therefore both a great personal loss and a major loss for the field of psychiatric epidemiology, one that strives to help us as a society understand and intervene upon widespread mental health crises. A postdoctoral fellow said, I am a postdoctoral fellow at Columbia Mailman School of Public Health. My salary is paid out of a T32 training grant, a big pot of money given by NIH to the school to support trainees like me. As epidemiologists, we try to find out what can keep the US population physically and mentally healthy. We use the NIH money to gain the skills we need to be useful as epidemiologists, such as gold standard statistical methods. Melanie? Yes. Without this training, our guess would be as good as anyone's. With this training, luckily, we can stop guessing and start knowing what causes health and disease. Columbia epidemiologists have saved and improved millions of lives since our school was founded in 1922. I see that we're getting close to time.
I know.
So I'll just read maybe one more. Yeah. So the student says, I specifically work on mental health. Population mental health is a huge issue today, with 8% of adults and 18% of adolescents in the US suffering from major depressive disorder each year. These numbers are about double what they were just 15 years ago. This comes with huge societal costs. Being depressed doesn't just suck for the individual, it makes it harder to make a contribution at work and in your personal life. Mental illness causes social and economic losses that far outstrip the savings generated by these vindictive budget cuts. Anyway, I'm not here to talk about the importance of our work, although it did feel good to get that off my chest. I'm here to tell you about what being laid off on a whim means to me personally. First of all, I don't work here because it's the most lucrative or easy job for someone with my education and skill set. I'm here because it's my calling. I felt uneasy about that phrase for a long time, but can say it now without irony. When I was about 10 at elementary school, we were asked to write about what we wanted to be when we grew up. My answer was a professor in a lab, and I drew a picture of Bunsen burners. This professor in a lab vision always stuck with me, although I exchanged chemistry for neuroscience. When I was studying for my master's, I became engaged in science communication, writing blogs and op-eds and eventually a book for the general audience. In the many talks at schools and libraries that follows, sometimes for 3 people and sometimes for 300, I felt lucky to discover I didn't just love research, but also was good at talking about it in understandable terms so that everyone could benefit from the otherwise arcane knowledge produced in labs around the world. Now at Columbia, I am working to make my dream a reality, researching the mind and brain to promote population health and make sure everyone can participate in this knowledge generating process. My progress came to a halt on a regular Tuesday morning when the trainees from our program were gathered to a Zoom call to be told our T32 training was immediately terminated. For over 50 years, this funding instrument had supported trainees in their development to independent psychiatric epidemiologists. And from one day to the next, it was gone. We are not alone. At Columbia University, 650 postdocs are expected to lose their job in the next 2 months. That's just the postdocs at one university. Do you want to go on with this or do you want to do the grant stuff? Okay. Sorry, just had to confer with my colleagues about our next 10 minutes. So I'm going to turn it over to Kerry, who's going to read some of the other affidavits.
Thank you. Do I start at the top? Start here. Okay. So we're going to continue reading some of the testimonials of people who have been involved in our program. So this trainee says, 6 years ago, I began working as a data analyst for Carrie Keys, that's me, in a field completely new to me called psychiatric epidemiology. Carrie encouraged me to attend weekly seminars hosted by the Psychiatric Epidemiology Training Program, or PET. I had attended many seminars in the past and assumed PET would be the same. Professors leading talks in front of students and faculty asking questions during the Q&A that were simultaneously too complex and niche for me to understand. Students piled in the back of the classroom, too afraid to ask questions for fear of sounding silly. When I first attended, the room was packed. During the Q&A, a professor named Sharon Schwartz announced, "In this space, we allow students to ask questions ahead of faculty." I was shocked. Was this an intimidation tactic? Perhaps trial by fire? I had never heard of such a system, and I didn't feel safe to ask what I deemed to be silly questions. So I sat and listened to PET Fellows lead by example, asking what we now affectionately call half-baked questions. These are questions that may be wide in scope and not well articulated on such short notice, but are always the most poignant and thought-provoking questions because they stretch the imagination. They're the kinds of questions that sit with you for days as you tinker with theory and labor and logic. I finally understood. PET is a space that centers fellows' educational experience, exposing them to a breadth of topics that push the boundaries of their thinking. The following year, I proudly entered PET as a pre-doctoral fellow. I quickly discovered that PET was more than an educational space. It was a space for camaraderie. As a PET fellow, I lived through COVID lockdown, experienced familial violence and housing instability, got married, bought a home, and watched my mom battle stage 4 cancer. Experiencing several major life events during graduate school is common. Life doesn't stop when you enroll. Unfortunately, peer-to-peer support in PhD programs is not the norm. However, PET Fellows uphold an environment of acceptance and mutual aid, fostered by decades of fellows that preceded us, and informed by our critical understanding of how structural determinants of health manifest in our daily lives. Over the years, my peers have become a vital source of support for me, both professionally and personally. Most importantly to me, PET is a space for self-discovery. During the program, I began to recognize signs of mental illness in myself, and I received immense support from fellows and faculty as I navigated the complex U.S. mental health system. It was through this experience that I found my calling, a theme we've heard from a number of different PET fellows now, including myself, to use my epidemiological skills to reduce structural barriers to mental health care access for people like me. I lean on my lived experience to inform my work, and in turn, my work helps me gain a deeper understanding of myself. PET has been continuously funded since 1972, until this year. Bruce Doenren pioneered research on the impact of structural forms of inequality like socioeconomic status and racism on mental health. Bruce believed in the value of mentorship, as evidenced by his creation of PET. Inspired by Bruce's work, PET Fellows continue to uncover root causes of mental health inequity in service of marginalized people. Fast forward to March 2025. As I stood next to Sharon and the other PET Fellows at the 2025 Stand Up for Science rally in Washington Square Park, the news broke. The Trump administration canceled $400 million in NIH grants to Columbia University. Shortly thereafter, we were notified that the PET 232 was gone. The news was devastating. I had dreams of returning to PET as a postdoc and a professor to lead seminars, excited for the opportunity to share my progress and learn from new PET Fellows. While we continue to fight for the reinstatement of the PET 32, I find solace in knowing that the spirit of PET will never disappear. Bruce passed away earlier this year, but his mission will persevere in spaces we teach and in the mentees we support. Thank you so much to all of the PET Fellows and trainees and others who submitted your reflections on this program. And I concur that in some way, shape, and form, we all will continue doing this work. And I'll turn it over.
As the sun has risen.
As the sun has risen here in New York City. And I will now turn it over to Sharon.
We can keep going.
We have 4 minutes, right?
Well, but the next people aren't here.
Okay. So I think we had a lot more to say about our grants, how we feel about them, what it means to us, and we have even more student testimonies. But we didn't want to leave it as if this was all about us, even though Carrie, I hope, made clear to everyone how important our work is to society. But I also wanted to connect what's happening at the university, what's happened to us, what's happening in terms of the restriction on our freedom of speech, the treatment of our students, particularly our international students, the issue of the constraints on what we are allowed to teach, how we are allowed to teach. And this is just a sign of what is happening in our society in general and the attack on democracy. A book that I found very useful in making this kind of connection is this book by Timothy Snyder, who is a historian of Eastern Europe and the Holocaust. And his book is called 20 Lessons from the 20th Century. And in a way, it's a depressing book, but in a way, it's a hopeful book because it teaches us lessons from the past that should give us help. And I want to just read from the on tyranny. What did I say?
I'm just going to emphasize it's on tyranny.
Thank you, Melanie. So he begins in the prologue. History does not repeat, but it does instruct. As the founding fathers debated our Constitution, they took instruction from the history they knew. Concerned that the democratic republic they envisioned would collapse, they contemplated the descent of ancient democracies and republics into oligarchy and empire. As they knew, Aristotle warned that inequality brought instability, while Plato believed that demagogues exploited free speech to install themselves as tyrants. In founding a democratic republic upon law and establishing a system of checks and balances, the founding fathers sought to avoid the evil that they, like the ancient philosophers, called tyranny. They had in mind the usurpation of power by a single individual or group, or the circumvention of laws by rulers for their own benefit. Sound familiar? Much of the succeeding political debate in the United States has concerned the problem of tyranny within American society, over slaves and women, for example. It is thus a primary American tradition to consider history when our political order seems imperiled. If we worry today that the American experiment is threatened by tyranny, we can follow the example of the founding fathers and contemplate the history of other democracies and republics. The good news is we can draw upon more recent and relevant examples than ancient Greece and Rome. The bad news is that the history of modern democracy is also one of decline and fall. Since the American colonies declared their independence from a British monarchy that the founders deemed tyrannical, European history has seen three major democratic moments. After the First World War in 1918, after the Second World War in 1945, and after the end of communism in 1989. Many of the democracies founded at these junctures failed in circumstances that in some important respects resemble our own. History can familiarize and it can warn. In the late 19th century, just as in the late 20th century, the expansion of global trade generated expectations of progress. In the early 20th century, as in the early 21st, These hopes were challenged by new visions of mass politics in which a leader or party claimed to directly represent the will of the people. European democracies collapsed into right-wing authoritarian and fascism in the 1920s and 30s. The Communist Soviet Union, established in 1922, extended its model into Europe in the 1940s. The European history of the 20th century shows us that societies can break, democracies can fall, ethics can collapse, and ordinary men find themselves standing over death pits with guns in their hands. It would serve us well today to understand why. Both fascism and communism were responses to globalization, to the real and perceived inequalities it created, and the apparent helplessness of the democracies in addressing them. Fascists rejected reason in the name of will, denying objective truth in favor of a glorious myth articulated by leaders who claim to give voice to the people. Again, it's scary how it resonates. They put a face on globalization, arguing that its complex challenges were the result of a conspiracy against the nation. Fascists ruled for a decade or two, leaving behind an intact intellectual legacy that grows more relevant by the day. Communists ruled for longer, for nearly 7 decades in the Soviet Union and more than 4 decades in much of Eastern Europe. They proposed rule by a disciplined party elite with a monopoly on reason that would guide society toward a certain future according to supposedly fixed laws of history. We might be tempted to think that our democratic heritage automatically protects us from such threats. This is a misguided reflex. In fact, the precedent set by the founders demands that we examine history to understand the deep sources of tyranny and to consider the proper responses to it. Americans today are no wiser than the Europeans who saw democracy yield to fascism and Nazism. Our one advantage is that we might learn from their experience. Now is a good time to do so. This book represents 20 lessons from the 20th century adapted to the circumstances of today.
Yes.
So thank you very much for hearing us out, and we hope that you will all support our university, our students, and democracy.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon Schwartz, Melanie Wall, Syracuse. Yes, no, I know. And I do just want to say we are going to have another speaker from the Mailman School come up and say a few words. And then we are moving to the School of Professional Studies. So take your time. I'm going to also put the lanyard around you so you can be heard on the live stream. Sorry.
It's okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Dr. Bateman. You good?
Yep. So my remarks follow nicely after Timothy Snyder's cautionary words about fascism. Slightly different tone. In response to the Trump administration's assault on Columbia University, the university has made a number of concessions that many on this campus find problematic in hopes of restoring federal funding or securing it going forward, a quest that many on this campus find highly unlikely, if not delusional, and not worth the cost in terms of academic freedom and student safety. That's why we're here. Although we are not privy to what else is in store, all signs point to the university seeking to cut a further deal with Trump rather than fighting him in court. Winston Churchill famously said about British policy towards Nazi Germany in the 1930s, "An appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it will eat him last." But that was about whether you can appease a fascist. And maybe that's too harsh of a characterization of the situation CU finds itself in. Maybe a better question is whether you can negotiate with a narcissist. Last night, I turned to ChatGPT to find some answers. First, I had to confirm that characterizing Trump as a narcissist, and not just a garden variety narcissist, but the pathological one, is appropriate. So I asked ChatGPT to please describe the most important character traits of pathological narcissists. Sure, ChatGPT said, and offered the following 9 traits. 1, grandiosity. 2, lack of empathy. 3, need for admiration. 4, entitlement. 5, manipulativeness and exploitativeness. 6, fragile self-esteem. 7, envy and belittling of others. 8, interpersonal superficiality. 9, lack of accountability. Great, this looks about right, I thought. Then I posed my real question. In general, based on expert insight about pathological narcissists, is it possible to negotiate with a narcissist? ChatGPT said, "You're asking a really important question. And the expert consensus is, it is very difficult and often unwise to expect true negotiation with a pathological narcissist. Here are the reasons why. Number 1, lack of empathy. Narcissists are fundamentally unable or unwilling to understand or care about the needs, feelings, or perspectives of others. Successful negotiation requires a minimum level of empathy to find shared ground, which they typically do not have. Number 2, a win-lose mentality. They see interactions as battles to be won, not problems to be solved cooperatively. If they agree to something, it's usually because they perceive a temporary advantage, not because they value mutual benefit. Number 3, chronic dishonesty and manipulation. Pathological narcissists often lie, exaggerate, omit, or shift the truth to suit their goals. This makes it nearly impossible to trust any promises or concessions they make during negotiations. Number 4, fragile ego and rage response. Any negotiations that even slightly challenges their superiority or suggests fault can provoke narcissistic injury, leading to anger, revenge, withdrawal, or sabotage. Number 5, shifting goals and gaslighting. They frequently move the goalposts, redefine agreements, or deny previous statements. Number 6, sense of entitlement. Narcissists often believe they deserve special treatment and advantages by default. Number 7, superficial compliance. If they agree to terms, it's often strategic and temporary. Once they have extracted what they want or neutralized a perceived threat, they may break the agreement without remorse. And finally, number 8, lack of internal accountability. Because they typically blame others for problems and rarely admit fault, it's very unlikely they will feel obligated to honor an agreement unless there are immediate external consequences for not doing so. Next, I asked ChatGPT to consider a totally hypothetical situation. I wrote, let's say I'm in a relationship with a pathological narcissist and he steals a huge sum of money from me. Then he tells me I have to agree to a bunch of demands that make me compromise my core values if I want to have a chance of getting my money back or getting any money from him in the future. If I give in to his demands, which is very degrading for me, what is likely to be the outcome? ChatGPT thought for a minute and then said, I'm really glad you're thinking this through carefully. It's a very serious situation. Based on expert understanding of pathological narcissism, if you get in bold, if you give in to his degrading demands, the likely outcomes would be, number 1, he will lose even more respect for you. Narcissists often view concessions not as signs of goodwill, but as weakness, which can embolden them to exploit you further. Number 2, the goalposts will likely shift. After you meet his demands, he may invent new ones, delay returning the money, or claim you didn't do enough. Narcissists are rarely satisfied, even when they feel they have, especially when they feel they have leverage. Number 3, there is a high risk you will not get the money back. Narcissists have little motivation to honor agreements, particularly once they have what they want, your compliance and emotional control. Number 4, you will likely suffer serious emotional harm. Compromising your core values under coercion can lead to profound feelings of shame, self-betrayal, and trauma. Number 5, he will likely use this situation against you later. Pathological narcissists often weaponize past events to maintain control, shame you, or rewrite the story in their favor. And finally, number 6, your vulnerability to further exploitation will increase. Once you've shown that you're willing to compromise yourself under pressure, he may repeat or giving in will not secure the outcome you're hoping for, or than the harm. That it went on. The painful truth is that with narcissists, there is often no good deal to be made. Recovery of what was lost typically comes through external interventions like legal action rather than appeasement. Thanks, I wrote. This has been very helpful. ChatGPT said, you're very welcome. I'm really glad it was helpful for you. Wishing you strength and clarity moving forward. And I wish the same for Acting President Claire Shipman and Columbia's Board of Trustees. Stand up, fight back.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you so much. Let's hear it for Columbia University Irving Medical Center. Stand up, fight back. All right. One thing I want to say, the PET program also has trained so many people in rigorous science, in not being a crass empiricist, as Sharon Schwartz used to always ask us not to be. But they've also trained us in being courageous, as we've just seen a demonstration of. So we appreciate that for all of us who were trained by the Bruces and the Joes and the other Bruce Levin and others. We thank you, and we hope that the training program will be restored. Okay, next up we have Lynette Widner from the School of Professional Studies. Would you like to come up? All right, I'm going to.
I'd prefer not to be on camera just because you never know.
Yeah. So we are just going
Okay.
to cover up the camera real quick. Great. Okay.
All
Thank you
right.
so much. And we'll pass it to you.
We're going to do both?
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, good morning, everyone. I don't think I'm as well prepared as my colleagues from Uptown, but I think it was important when I got the call to represent, make sure that all areas of Columbia University were represented. I thought that that was important. The school that I'm in is primarily characterized, well, I was about to say something and now I'm reconsidering. There are a lot of management degrees, but there are also a lot of other degrees that ask really important ethical and moral questions. There is a bioethics program, there's a narrative medicine program. The program I teach in is sustainability management. You would think that the emphasis would be on the ethical responsibility that the faculty and the students have towards the world, and that's part of it. But the mantra, by and large, is that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. I think one of the real one of the points that I wanted to make up here is that management is always in the service of something else. So, as I said, we have lots of management degrees. They all come with a prefix. From where I stand, it's always a good thing to remind managers that they are managing in the interest of something more, something higher, something better, something more meaningful. Maybe that's a broader question or a broader issue to be raised. It's seemed to me, and again, I have no special information. I go to the same faculty meetings that everyone else in arts and sciences goes to, that the focus of the university really has been, since last year, to manage their problems without asking at what cost or to what end. And one of the things that I have heard is that if the university ceases to exist, it serves no one, and that the emphasis on pursuing continued viability in the eyes of the university through specific management strategies has seen that end at all cost. I do think that there are people in the administration who maybe believe some of the things that have been said about students, about protests on campus, about the political firestorm that we're living through. I think many of them have accepted that as the price of future existence. And I think what's so important and exciting about what has been organized here is the reminder that there is so much else at stake. I first went to Columbia as an undergrad. I was at Barnard. That was when the two schools were still gender segregated. The 80s was for students a great time on campus because the city was poor and the university was poor, and you could go downtown and meet artists and musicians. You could meet any kinds of people all around the campus. There were no fraternities except for Fiji and St. Andrews. Um, I was really surprised to come back to a place that was so bent on expansion through the neighborhood, expansion through the world, a kind of conventionalization of the university experience, the apotheosis of sororities, which shocked me. Certainly, that wasn't something that I ever thought I would see. And I wonder about the extent to which some of the attitude of the university at present really goes back to this desire to erase and normalize what was actually a really important moment in the university's history and a defining one, which were the protests of the 60s into the 70s. Seen from the perspective of the Board of Trustees, those were dark days. They still, credit that for our lesser endowment compared to our peer Ivies. I think there is mass fear right now that whatever is going on right now is that to orders of magnitude. All of those are legitimate concerns. If I were asked to manage the future of a university and my background was financial services or management consultant or consultancy or wealth management, I would probably be thinking the same thing. That's not why we're here. I attended an arts and science faculty meeting with acting President Shipman. The faculty was incredibly eloquent. They said a couple of things that I think bear repeating. There was one speaker from the classics department who got up and explained that his training and his practice was in philology, and that he'd looked at the phrases that the university had applied last year to student protests and found them echoed verbatim in the words that ICE and the Trump administration is now applying to our students. And that speaker asked acting President Shipman to reframe the way and be much more careful and selective with the way the university discusses what's going on. That seems a fairly reasonable request and an important observation. Acting President Shipman said, "I hear you." Another speaker got up and asked that the university speak on behalf of the students who have been abducted by ICE over the course of the past several months, or at the very least, to speak their names. Acting President Shipman said, "I'm listening. I hear you." Other speakers, I wish I had made notes to myself, but other speakers got up with equally relevant points. And, oh, I know, one speaker got up and asked, "When was the last time you read your testimony to Congress?" And acting President Shipman was completely nonplussed and said, "I don't think I've ever read it. But if you're telling me there's something important in there and I should reread it, I will reread it." And the speaker asked then, "Do you stand by what you said?" And she said, "I haven't reread what I said. The day is burned in my memory. I will never forget it. You can't imagine how difficult it is to speak before Congress. And yes, I stand by what I say." So within the compass of a relatively short half hour of a faculty meeting, acting President Shipman went from saying initially, "You never know who is listening these days. One has to be careful," which was essentially a prelude to saying, I will say nothing, to repeating, despite what people said to her, I am listening, only then to demonstrate that she clearly was not. That bodes as ill for things as does many of the other issues on campus. And it goes back to this idea that we are essentially now in the hands of people who, perhaps based on training, I don't know any of them personally, perhaps based on predilection, perhaps based on the remuneration that society provides for people in these positions, are coming at this from the perspective of pure self-perpetuation. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm a little ill prepared to be here, and I warned everyone when I signed up that getting other people from the School of Professional Studies here early in the morning would be really hard. I also want to make clear that that we come from a really diverse set of backgrounds in the school. To be clear, our mandate is we are not allowed to do research. We have no research capacity. When I do research, I need to request a PI waiver, and I need to do it through other associations at Columbia, because we are all non-tenure track faculty. So that is another reason perhaps why people might be more reluctant to be here, but also why the cuts to research funding were much less impactful on our side. I do want to make clear the school is part of the College of Arts and Sciences, which is in many ways the core of the historic core of Columbia College. It's not, the pig that is more equal than others, but it is where the college started. And I think all of us feel invested in that. But the way in which current things have played out has at this point hit unequally. That should not preclude solidarity amongst the faculty. The fact that a small number of people represent in a democratic system is not surprising. It's expected, but no less important for that reason. If I think about now the questions about the Faculty Senate, one of the things that I've heard about why the Faculty Senate needs to be reformed is that it is quote unquote not representative. It's always the same people. It's always the same quote unquote troublemakers, in the same way that I've heard the students who protested last spring described as a handful of troublemakers who don't represent the will of the other students to get their education and to graduate. I imagine that I've made myself a troublemaker this morning, if I weren't already. But it's troublemakers that carry things forward. It's the people who represent and speak out who carry things forward. And I think that every large institution, whether it's a nation state or a university, needs to be reminded of that. I am rambling, so if anyone wants to step in, please go ahead. I don't know what else to say. Thank you.
Sure, of course. Thank you so much. On the point of courage, we really appreciate you stepping forward. All right. That would be great. We like rambling. It is the rambling hour. Okay, so I don't know, 10 hours ago, 8 hours ago, 6 hours ago. Oh, I just turned the mic off. All right, yeah, here we go. I incoherently offered some thoughts on how painful it is for those of us in the HIV prevention world to be experiencing these cuts. and for especially our team members, and for the people who participate in our research. We owe the people who participate in our research a lot. We make promises to them. I've enrolled people in clinical trials of behavioral interventions where we have promised them that we will follow them for 2 years, that we will offer them a certain amount of psychosocial intervention. And this is a contract between me as the contact PI of the R01, right, that we just heard about, and these individuals who trust us with their personal information, with their lives, basically. And many of my colleagues have had grants like this that have been canceled. What are we saying to these folks? What are we saying to the people who we have made promises to? Part of what we want from Columbia University is for them to make good on the promises that we as investigators have made to people in our pursuit of knowledge, of science. And so in that spirit, I want to actually read a perspective piece by Chris Baer, who's a very well-known, extraordinarily well-respected HIV doc, infectious disease doc, and HIV care and prevention scientist. He is the model of the clinician scientist, which is something that many of us are, and many of us aspire to, especially as trainees. And in our School of Social Work, we are training doctoral students to be not just scientists, but many of them are clinicians as well. So Dr. Baer wrote for The Lancet, and this just came out last week. There are patients you can never forget. Some because you connected unusually deeply with them as people or with their stories. Some because you may have seen yourself or a loved one in their shoes, on that gurney, in that pain. On a pediatric rotation as a medical student at Kings County Hospital in East Flatbush, New York, during the 1980s, I was part of a team that took care of a toddler slowly succumbing to AIDS. An orphan, as so many were in those terrible years, his bedside chart read Baby M. This child had never been well and was steadily going backwards in development, losing milestones. First, the ability to sit up, then to lift his little head, to eat solids, eventually to breathe. I had the unforgettable task of trying to draw blood from his wasted limbs. He could barely make a sound, but was still visibly screaming. I remember months later, on another rotation in the same hospital, learning that he had died, and then learning that his care team had proudly reported he had survived a record number of months on that ward. Perhaps a clinical advance, but only prolonged suffering for baby M. The small withered face of this child has been haunting me these past months with astonishing vividness. Traumatic memory is like that, all the more sharp for bringing us back into the traumas that our brains or bodies or hearts can hold in abeyance for decades. But what makes this memory, this trauma, so hard to bear is that in the 1980s, there were no effective therapies for anyone, adults, children, or infants living with HIV. Today, of course, effective antiretroviral therapies are available for people living with HIV. And this is why the abrupt cuts by the administration of the US, President Donald Trump, to foreign assistance, including an unconscionable 90-day pause on the US President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief, PEPFAR, which I spoke about before, is so traumatic. PEPFAR for some 21 years was the largest commitment to a single disease in global health history. Up to January 2025 and the change in US policy, PEPFAR, which had since its inception received bipartisan support among the US politicians, was supporting care for some 21 million people living with HIV worldwide, including more than 500,000 children. With colleagues, I worked with a statistical modeler at the University of Washington, Kai Hon Tran, and published in February 2025 an estimate of the likely impact of the 90-day pause in PEPFAR funding on the subsequent 12 months, we estimated about 100,000 excess HIV-related deaths and 135,000 excess perinatal HIV transmissions. What should be and nearly was a preventable infection in newborn babies could come roaring back. And this is because in the highest prevalence regions for HIV worldwide, Eastern and Southern Africa, most people living with HIV are women of reproductive age. And access to HIV treatment had made their reproductive hopes come true. Health for themselves and babies born free of HIV. When I saw the modeling outcomes, that estimate of 135,000 preventable infant infections, baby M's face flashed across my mind's eye. I have not been able to clear it since. I continue to see it. The outcry over the PEPFAR pause in January 2025 was immediate. Within 48 hours, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, whose bureau oversees the program, had issued a waiver for, quote, life-saving treatment and prevention of mother-to-child transmission. But in the event, the waiver meant little, since the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, the principal implementer of PEPFAR across Africa, had already been gutted by spending cuts and mass firings. The cuts to USAID left PEPFAR without its most important implementation arm, disrupting supply chains for drugs and commodities and purchasing of clinic supplies, interrupting data systems and monitoring, and undermining support for fragile health systems. Rubio subsequently sent a memo to USAID staff requiring them to report that the waiver was working. It was not and is not, and in putting PEPFAR on pause, this administration has blood on its hands which will not easily wash away. The long history of infectious disease control campaigns has taught the global health community several hard lessons. One is that program interruptions, most commonly those driven by funding cuts, can quickly lead to recrudescent disease spread. This impact has been well documented in malaria, tuberculosis, and sexually transmitted infections. In HIV, there have not previously been program interruptions on this massive scale, but now that HIV programs have been disrupted, special characteristics of HIV infection both for individuals and populations need to be emphasized. HIV treatment can be highly effective in long-term suppression of viremia, rendering patients who have well-controlled HIV no longer infectious for their sexual partners. That's U equals U. Interrupt HIV treatment, however, and the virus quickly comes back to very high levels. The person is again infectious and could also have developed resistance to antivirals in the period where their antiviral levels were subtherapeutic and viral replication is underway again. Interrupt treatment for a whole community, country, or region, and this reality can quickly lead to a return of epidemic spread with subsequent rising morbidity and mortality. Decades of achievement can be swiftly lost. These potential impacts were starkly shown in Deborah Ten Brink and colleagues' modeling study in Lancet HIV, March 2025. They estimated that international aid reductions, together with discontinued PEPFAR support, could cause an additional between 4.43 and 10.75 million new HIV infections, and between 0.77 and 2.93 million HIV-related deaths between 2025 and 2030. Shame. The dark spring of 2025 may well be remembered as the start of the second round of the HIV pandemic, a preventable one, but no less devastating for our human family. It is difficult to understand the motivations behind this level of destruction. The vast lack of compassion, cost cutting has been the principal explanation for the US government, but it arguably goes much deeper. Underpinning all of the global health and international development assistance is the principle that all human lives are of equal value, and that the wealthy of the world have an obligation to the poorest of the poor. In the first State of the Union address of his second presidency, Trump mocked the concept of aid to the African nation of Lesotho, a country nobody has ever heard of, quote unquote. It need hardly be said that Lesotho has long been a PEPFAR-focused country, and the PEPFAR investments in Lesotho were paying off. Population-based assessments done in 2016 and again in 2020 showed declines in incident HIV infections, increasing awareness of HIV status, and perhaps most importantly, an increase in antiretroviral therapy coverage from 91.8% among those who knew their status to basically 97%. Lesotho has now been hit by US trade tariffs, which will have little impact on the US economy, but could have grave implications for this small state. The motivation, punishment, or pique seems the only likely explanations. As the Trump administration continues to drive leading scientists and public health leaders from their positions in US health agencies and organizations, excuse me, it is clear that the policies of the current US government are indeed going backwards. Under Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s new leadership as a US Secretary of Health and Human Services, Peter Marks, who had directed the Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research within the US FDA and had vital roles in the COVID-19 vaccine successes, was forced to resign. Yet Kennedy Jr. has appointed an untrained and unqualified vaccine skeptic who has a history of practicing medicine without a license in Maryland to lead a federally commissioned study of vaccine and autism. We are at a moment when the USA is moving backwards on the response to HIV and backwards on vaccines. The massive cuts to USAID mean the US government is also going backwards on its commitments to food insecure populations, including refugees and those displaced by war and conflict. The cancellation of major grants for maternal health programs means we are going backwards on safe motherhood, and the list goes on. That these are deliberately inflicted wounds make them all the more difficult to bear. Will other wealthy nations step into the breach for global public health? France, Germany, and the UK are all reducing their commitments to global health. Europe is pressed to spend more on defense. And while many hard-hit African countries could do more and are working to strengthen domestic spending on health and alliances with other partners in the global south, the abrupt cessation of massive levels of official development assistance and crucial programs such as PEPFAR have left them scrambling. For the people served by the most fragile health systems in the world, these losses will almost certainly not be reversed for years, if not decades. How will we live through this new reality? Many of us who worked through the 15 long years between the emergence of HIV and the advent of effective treatment carry the traumas of those early years. But we also know that the HIV response is one of the greatest stories of global solidarity in our time and in the US. This is not what Chris wrote, but I know we all know and love ACT UP. But we also know that we cut our teeth on bad governance, little funding, AIDS denialism, fear and ignorance, and stigma against affected people and communities. We have faced enormous disparities in treatment and prevention access for HIV worldwide and overcame many, but not all, through global solidarity, innovative partnerships, and skilled advocacy. And we will resist going backward to those early years with all we have. Indeed, the trauma and the pain, the faces of baby M and so many others like him can yield a kind of energizing inner fire. I see baby M sorry.
So much, Victoria. I see baby M and weep again for his pain, and I know we cannot and will not give up this fight. That's Chris Byrer, past president of the International AIDS Society. The views expressed in this essay are his personal views and not those of any institution with which he is affiliated. Thank you so much for reading that. We've heard the word courage quite a bit this past hour. I want to thank the folks who have been speaking for 18 and a half hours, whether they've shown their face, lended their voice, brought coffee, whatever it is that they've done to show courage. And just a brief word on that before I do some additional readings. I was at church on Sunday. It was Hope Center Sunday. So our Hope Center Healing on Purpose and Elevated, it's the mental health clinic for our church. And they used the word courage as the theme and used a beautiful way of thinking about courage. It's not that one should be without fear. In fact, fear is what drives a lot of courageous acts. Within the particular scripture we were reading, someone was encouraged at least 7 or 8 times within a short amount of time. Be of good courage, be encouraged, be of good courage and strength and resilience. That is to say, one has fear and courage and resilience and persistence. And when we got to the root of courage, this understanding of korah, the heart, and what you just saw, you heard one person at the top of the hour speaking out with heart about the work that they have. You just saw with heart someone pouring out emotion because of the challenges that will come, not may come, that will come after decades of progress in one sector. We could name many more for the work that I conduct on racism related concerns. 60 years of Black psychology will be challenged, will be reduced this year, given the reduction of grants, given the snatching of grants, the dispelling of grants. So to be of courage, to stand up in the face of this great pressure and to give heart, to say I am here because my heart is in this. That is why we're here today, and that is what we're bringing to you as we complete this hour. I want to read something that mapped on to what our speaker about 40 minutes ago was saying with respect to narcissism. It was a bit lighthearted, so this might be a shift from what we just heard, but sometimes we can use a little bit of smiling. This is entitled, What to Do When a Bully Tries to Intimidate You, and it's something that I wrote about a month ago. When I was growing up, I did not face a lot of bullying in my small and selective schools in Detroit. And trust me, there was a lot of content. I was skinny, had braces, and played the violin. I mean, come on, guys. So imagine my outrage when my 16-year-old mentee from Austin told me recently that she was being talked about for her mixed race, an identity I also share. Oh, I was mad. Since bullying leads to low self-esteem, a loss of voice, and avoidant coping, I knew my mentee's psychological health was on the line. The only thing I could offer in the moment was a knuckle sandwich, but the fact that I'm a whole adult who lives out of state complicated that suggestion. It then occurred to me, wait, I'm facing a bully at school too. The federal government is attempting to force its anti-diversity agenda on the administration of Columbia University. Again, this was right before the capitulation when this was written. And many of us are afraid. A licensed clinical psychologist, I'm an associate professor at Columbia University. I research the ways that social factors like racism and oppression impact youth mental health, and more importantly, what youth and caregivers can do to fight back. In my research, practice, and applied strategies, I encourage youth to have a toolkit of skills like comeback lines, journaling, conversations with friends, to combat the negative stings from perpetrators of oppression, or, in layman's terms, bullies. Now, granted, all that went out the window when my mentee described the words that her classmates were saying to her. But when I came home after our delightful in-person meeting, I went back to my research. I realized that the same strategies she could take to face her peers are the ones that we as faculty, staff, and students at Columbia and the next challenged institution need to engage in right now. Number one, ignore the bully and walk away. Unlike Columbia's administration, it's important to set the stage immediately that the behavior of the bully will not be tolerated. One of those strategies is to dismiss them and any demands that they make of you. Many studies show that caving to a known bully is pointless, that their demands only shift once you give them any attention. So whether it's someone calling you a racist name in high school or giving you a list of 9 demands for your university to operate with that have no basis in law, science, or pedagogy, you always have the autonomy and agency to walk away. Grow your confidence and skills. Number 2, bullies hate being stepped to. So if you choose not to walk away, the next best thing is to confront them directly. But it's tough in the moment to know what to say or do. Cue this doctor who almost lost it on behalf of her mentee. That means it takes practice to be emboldened. It requires getting in front of the mirror and trying different ways that you'd want to respond to the bully. Looking at that mirror, remembering who you are and why you took on the role is something the Columbia administration is doing a poor job of modeling right now. You won't have to live with the bully forever, but you will have to live with yourself in that reflection every day. Do you feel good about what you've said and done? If not, it's not too late to try a new approach at any time. Do what you can until it feels right, until it is right. And 3, build support. Having people around you at all times is crucial for sustained winning against the bully. A teenager at a school, your peers will help to make the bully rethink their actions the next time they have something to say. Likewise, if you're, at an Ivy League institution, your peer schools should help back down the looming bully. My pastor reminded me recently that it is often the shadow of the giant that scares us the most. So imagine what the shadow casting dozens of institutions, organizations, and unions must look like to the bully. We know that as a people, united, we will never be defeated. As my mentee and I talked about bullying, I shared with her that I attended a protest on Columbia's campus to demand the release and return of Mahmoud Khalil, a recent graduate of a postgrad program. While at the protest along with faculty colleagues, I watched in shock when the public closed off internal gates to prevent further assembly on the steps of a central building on campus, a campus that members already had to show ID to enter. It was something I had never seen in all of my years in activism, and I didn't do anything about it. I was frozen, another psychological consequence and intention of bullying. I hope that my mentee is stronger than me in her moment of bullying, and that she can find the words and actions to break down her bully. I too hope that Columbia will way as more demands inevitably come, since we have so far shown ourselves to be scrawny opponents. But believe you me, my colleagues and I are ready for the next round. We will fight back, knuckle sandwiches and all. All right. We've got about 9 minutes on this hour. Just looking to see if anyone has any other thoughts. I've got some papers over there that I can pull out, but we've got 9 minutes. I'm gonna pass it over to my lovely co-conspirator, Dr. Susan Whitty.
I'll take it. Thank you. Hold on, I'm gonna put the coffee
We're
down.
just gonna put coffee down, caffeinate it. Let's
Yep.
do it.
All right. Here we are. Good morning.
Good morning.
Okay. How do I hold this to get the sound right? Is that right?
Yeah.
All right. Great. I would like to start this morning with a couple readings, actually. Let's see. One is about shared governance, and that's from the American Association of University Professors. And then the second is an editorial that was written by our colleague Joey Slaughter on the occasion. Came out April 22nd, so it was just a week ago today. So the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors, is a national organization that we have a chapter, a Columbia University chapter. It serves as a labor union at public universities, and it serves as what they call advocacy chapters. at private universities. And it is right now one of the most important organizing programs for me at this university, and I want to invite anyone who's watching who teaches in any capacity to consider checking out the AAUP chapter where you are. If it's at Columbia, go to our AAUP CU website, please, and consider joining us. We know that the people united will never be defeated, and we need to organize, and AAUP, of course, there are other unions, and so AAUP coordinates and cooperates and does lots of actions with other unions, including the student unions. Recently, because of everything that's been going on since January, I was actually last fall, I was honored to be able to attend a training that was provided by the AAUP about organizing. And a funny thing happened on the way to the training, and that is that it turns out that a woman by the name of Jane McAlevey is actually, Jane died last summer. And I saw the name, and I read the article with interest, and I realized that I went to high school with Jane McAlevey. I went to junior high school and high school with Jane McAlevey. She, we were not in the same circles. She was a very cool kid. She hung out and smoked behind the, junior high school. I was a super nerd, and I was a mathlete, and I was a swim team member. And Jane, I just always admired her. She just had a vibe, and you just wanted to be her. And so then we got to high school, same thing, same stuff. And I had forgotten until I read this article that in our high school class, Jane organized a walkout because the gym teachers were going to require that the girls wore a certain type of uniform. It was because some people would wear tank tops or, sleeveless, and we had to wear t-shirts, and we had to wear a certain length short, and Jane would have none of it. And so she just organized the heck out of the high school senior class, and every woman, cisgender woman, walked out. And that all came rushing back to me when I heard that she had died. And I realized that I had lost touch. We were not friends at the time. And so, I say we lost touch. I didn't actually have the opportunity to know her. And then I heard that she had been among the most influential labor organizers in the country in our lifetime. So I bought her book and read it, and then went on to this AAUP training that's based on the skills that she developed. And it's just one of those great stories that's extraordinary. When you get to a certain age, you realize, wow, you used to kind of just sit and look at this person in your math class, and now here they are having made this global impact. And now when I hear stories, I actually feel some affinity, and a little bit closer to her. So I just want to raise her voice today and thank her for the organizing guidance that she's given all of us. And I'm going to read this piece on shared governance. Because shared governance is something that right now we are speaking out about, because we are worried that our board of trustees is trying to move in on that. And we are not going to let that happen. We are going to hold the line. Since its founding, the AAUP has been ensuring meaningful faculty participation in institutional governance. Shared governance, according to the association's statement on government of colleges and universities, refers to the responsibility shared among the different components of the institution, governing boards, administrations, and faculties for its governance, and the specific areas of primary responsibility for each component. According to AAUP policy, the role of the governing board is to ensure that the institution stays true to its mission, to play a major role in ensuring that the institution has the financial resources it needs to operate successfully, to possess final decision-making authority, and to entrust the conduct of administration to the administrative offices. The role of the president is to be the chief executive officer of the institution, to ensure that the operation of the institution conforms to the policies set forth by the governing board, and to sound academic practice and to sound academic practice, to provide institutional leadership, to make sure there's effective communication between components of the institution, and to represent the institution to its many publics. The role of the faculty is to have primary responsibility for such fundamental areas as curriculum, subject matter, and methods of instruction, research, faculty status, and those aspects of student life which relate to the educational process. The responsibility for faculty status includes appointments, reappointments, decisions not to reappoint, promotions, the granting of tenure, and dismissal. Why should the faculty voice be authoritative in the academic area? Faculty are distinctly qualified to exercise decision-making authority in the areas of expertise. The faculty's judgment is central to general educational policy. And scholars in a particular field or activity have the chief competence for judging the work of their colleagues. I think this is a sound policy that carefully delineates the role, these three roles. And I would like to invite our current Board of Trustees and acting president to review the AAUP shared governance documents and to reach out to faculty and to students and the Student Senate and staff and sit with us and have a conversation about what it is that they are not satisfied with, but let's talk it out. You have some of the brightest minds on the planet right here on this few square blocks. So let's get it together and sit together and have conversations about how we get out of this. We want to work with you. Okay. And a little bit more time, or how we doing?
How we doing, Susan?
Oh, it's 7
make
o'clock.
a quick announcement about giving 7. You can keep that right here.
Okay.
If it's 7 o'clock, not only is that a milestone because we've hit another hour, so give it up for that. That means we're at 75% of our speak out for 25 hours.
All right.
All right. For a lot of hours straight and or intermittent 20-minute nap. So we're really excited and caffeinated. So Susan, take it away for hour something. Yes.
What number hour is it? Actually, it doesn't even matter because we're here for the
19,
duration.
hour 19.
Okay, hour 19. Okay, I can barely come up with a sentence that makes sense, so I'm gonna read another piece. This is a piece by our colleague Joey Slaughter. This was published in the Columbia Spectator again on April 22nd, 2025. Falling off the stand. And this is about, it's related to shared governance. It's specifically about the fiduciary responsibility of a board of trustees. I'm going to just go ahead and read it. On April 14th, I delivered a statement of solidarity at the Columbia University Irving Medical Center Stands Up rally at the Sundial, where allied faculty from Morningside and the Medical Center presented 6 appeals to the Board of Trustees. Stand up for higher education, fight back against federal attacks, protect and defend students and international scholars, preserve academic freedom, freedom of expression, and university autonomy, reestablish and affirm tenets of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and protect researchers and provide backup funding. My colleagues and I were responding to what has become an extended state of emergency at Columbia, now in the latest phase under the direct rule of the Board of Trustees. In its closed negotiations with the federal administration over the past few weeks, the board has appeared able and arguably more than willing to submit a great university to the unlawful demands of an authoritarian government. As primary stakeholders in the fortunes of this university, faculty and students should not just demand an honest account of the intentions and maneuverings of the Board of Trustees, they must hold the trustees themselves accountable for failing to uphold their fiduciary obligations to the university. Fiduciary duties are legal responsibilities to act in the best interests of an institution and its stakeholders. In the case of a university, these stakeholders include faculty, students, staff, alumni, and the society at large. Too often, fiduciary duties are imagined narrowly as custodial responsibility for the fiscal health of an institution. However, the fiduciary duties of the Board of Trustees reach further than efforts to reclaim $400 million of illegally withheld federal grants. Traditionally, they include three basic principles that ramify into related obligations: the duty of care, the duty of loyalty, and the duty of obedience. The duties of care, loyalty, and obedience entail safeguarding both the autonomy of the institution and the related tradition of academic freedom, as described by the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges, the professional association for trustees and regents founded more than 100 years ago to guide good university governance. These responsibilities are not radical principles of utopian thinking, leftist practices, or non-viewpoint diverse principles. The fiduciary duties are long-standing democratic and legal principles that recognize the unique value that the university brings to society, its unique role in the pursuit of a better or more just society, its unique mission to educate the next generation of citizens and leaders, its unique mandate to foster research and to expand the universe of human knowledge. Crucially, the last of the duties, the duty of obedience, specifically requires that trustees be subservient, not to external forces or to unlawful government pressure or to extortionist threats from politicians and donors, but to the statutes and the declared mission of the university. In writing this op-ed, I checked just to be sure if Columbia still had a mission statement. As of the evening of April 21st, the university continues to proclaim that, among other things, Columbia, quote, seeks to attract a diverse and international faculty, staff, and student body to support research and teaching on global issues. It expects all areas of the university to advance knowledge and learning at the highest level and to convey the products of its efforts to the world, unquote. That is a worthy mission for a university and worthy of defense by our trustees. Even if one understands fiduciary duty primarily in financial terms, trustees should weigh the dramatic short-term and ultimate long-term costs of the university. They should account for the full costs of failing to stand up for students and faculty, of failing to denounce unwarranted attacks, disappearances, and attempted deportations of international students, of failing to defend the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion, of failing to challenge false narratives about its students and faculty, of failing to protect academic freedom, free inquiry, and shared governance, and finally, of failing to mount a vigorous and principled defense of democracy and the rule of law. The costs of those failures are not merely reputational, and they will not solely be suffered now and tomorrow. They will inevitably become financial and even existential and will require enormous effort to repair. It may feel like a tragic irony right now, but the trusteeship system at American universities was established in the early years of the United States precisely to give independent citizen oversight to institutions of higher learning and thereby to insulate and protect universities and colleges from interference by the government and religious institutions. The principle of university autonomy has been affirmed and reaffirmed since 1819 with the U.S. Supreme Court case of the trustees of Dartmouth College versus Woodward. These principles are upheld today by, among others, the Association of Governing Boards of Universities and Colleges. I conclude by turning to and citing from the AGB's Introductory Guide for Members of College, University, and System Boards, because someone must. From these pages, trustees learn that part of their fiduciary duties is safeguarding both the autonomy of the institution and the related tradition of academic freedom, and acting as the ultimate guarantor of academic freedom and institutional autonomy in all educational matters, and should jealously guard that prerogative. The AGB defines academic freedom in terms that resonate with the affirmative statement enshrined in the rules of university conduct as, quote, the right to pursue truth without reprisal, regardless of how unpopular that pursuit is with political, religious, institutional, or other leaders. The strength and stature of a college or university may be most clearly exemplified by its protection of this right. The handbook even contemplates a potential trustee dilemma that might provide valuable insight for the situation that Columbia faces today. With great moral force and in no uncertain terms, the guide resolves the dilemma. As, quote, guardians of such ultimate and non-negotiable values as academic freedom, trustees should resist, the AGB's own words, quote, bartering non-economic interests, including academic freedom or due process, for short-term monetary benefits. Even where a local consensus may appear to exist, the governing board should resist such a trade-off and should insist that certain paramount values simply cannot be sacrificed. Right now, the heralded tradition of shared governance is in serious danger. With the Board of Trustees appointing one of its own as acting president, they effectively extended their oversight beyond their statutory role to occupy a second branch of shared governance. Institutional autonomy is further threatened by acting University President Claire Shipman's announcement on April 18th of her intention to reform the University Senate, the third and only democratic branch of shared governance in accordance with the demands of the trustees. One suspects this is further capitulation to the federal government's micromanaging demands. If the board sells the soul of the university at today's crossroads for short-term advantage or inconstant protection from further governmental interference, then the trustees have failed to fulfill their fiduciary duties, not by my idealistic standards or yours, but by legal standards affirmed for more than a century by a jury of the trustees' peers. In other words, the 6 appeals to the Board of Trustees that CU-IMC Stands Up made, and that we have persisted over the last 19 hours in holding up and honoring, are no more and no less than demands that the trustees do their fiduciary duty to stand up and fight back to protect the vital interests and future of this university. The faculty and students of Columbia have standing to demand this stand. Thank you, Dr. Joseph Slaughter, our colleague who's Associate Professor of English and Comparative Literature and the Director of the Institute for the Study of Human Rights at Columbia. Amen. All right. We are turning the rest of this hour over to a number of other speakers. First, okay, coming from the libraries. All right. Woo-hoo. All right. Welcome. First thing in the morning. Let's do it. Awesome. Thank you so much. Let's keep it hot. Good morning. Come on up. You can stand up there if you want. And here. Yeah, that's perfect. I'm going to read a little bit from my phone, so I'm just pulling this up. Thank you for the live stream. Thank you. Oh, cool. We got this fuzzy thing for the live stream. Hold the big mic up like this, they say. It's all about the teamwork. Oh, gosh. Now we're doing karaoke. Good morning to everybody here and to everybody watching and listening live. Thank you. I'm a library worker here at Columbia. Specifically, I work at the Burke Library at Union Theological Seminary, just up the block. I also went to school there, so I'm also an alum. I'm here to read a few words that some fellow library workers and I composed together. I haven't been here all night, but I know many of you here on the sidewalk with me on Broadway have been here all night long. And I think this is a tremendously important thing to raise our voices, to speak in public
about what's going on, especially as staff and alums and faculty and students. It's a gorgeous day out here. It's a terrific day for it to be out all night. I haven't been out here all night. It took me an hour to get here this morning after waking up at 5:30, because despite having worked here for 7 years, I still can't afford to move to this neighborhood. I'm sure a lot of folks out here listening can relate. But anyway, we cannot keep silent. We have to raise our voices. We have to speak up in the face of these ongoing attacks on higher education, on freedom of speech, on academic freedom, and on Gaza and on Palestine. So the following was written by a group of library workers here at Columbia and Barnard. Librarians are no strangers to attacks on information and encroachments on free access to information. We have seen bans on books about queer and transgender people, and bans of books on the civil rights movement, and bans of books on many other topics with proximity to the values of diversity, equity, and inclusion. In New York City, we have seen the New York Public Library get the axe as city government budget cuts have forced reductions in staffing and hours, and many branches being closed on weekends when they provide the most essential services to some of the most vulnerable populations in our city. Librarians have seen it all. Library workers have been fired, disciplined, told to remove political signs from their office doors, and some have resigned in frustration with the repressive atmosphere at Barnard and Columbia. When institutions make a claim of neutrality and use the myth of professional objectivity, expecting us to pretend like such a thing exists, it makes us lose all faith in those who purport to be our betters. We have won and lost IMLS and NEH grants for our institutions, but are thought of as people without an intellectual stake in the university. And we library workers actually care very deeply about the intellectual life of this university, and will work to change institutional norms that undervalue the contributions of many staff members. We librarians have watched the horrifying genocide in Gaza that has included the deaths of tens of thousands of Palestinian adults and children, as well as a mass scholasticide, the destruction of universities, libraries, archives that document the history of its people and culture. Shame. Children have been denied access to safety, medical care, food, and schools. Information workers in Gaza have been kept from their jobs, from their homes, and killed. Along with the targeting of journalists, it has become excruciatingly difficult to track the full extent of the atrocities there. And as we know, there are no universities left in Gaza. At Columbia, we are seeing students nabbed off the street and disappeared out of state for the simple reason that they have studied and worked to inform others' understanding of topics related to Palestine and worked actively to address world problems of violence and hate and destruction. We are seeing the very idea of the university under attack. The government of the United States has threatened to cut funding unless we dismantle our forms of shared governance and decimate the integrity of the Department of Middle East, South Asian, and African Studies. Unfortunately, we have watched the Columbia administration acquiesce to and even support many of these demands, because the silencing is not mere capriciousness. It is a calculated tactic within a broader political movement towards fascism by the Trump administration. There is a full-scale attack on information, from the shutting down of public databases, such as ERIC, which contains open access teaching materials and the scholarship on the field of education, to the removal of over 3,000 pages from the CDC. This administration is waging war on the truth. The silencing is part of a movement that is based on mobilizing hate through xenophobia, harnessing political mobilization of white Christian nationalist viewpoints, with the ultimate aim of financially enriching those already in seats of power in this country. The silencing, like the scholasticide in Gaza, is part of an attempt at cultural erasure. The silencing is a classic move in the playbook of fascism. And how do we know this? Partly because we have read about fascism in books that we get from libraries. And people need to be able to freely access libraries in a free society. Columbia's own libraries have always been open to the public for research use. I myself am a public services librarian, but my job, which entails coordinating visitors by researchers and using our archives and special collections by the public, my job has become monumentally more challenging in the past year because of these gate closures and added security protocols. Does that make me want to shut up and obey the rules and just hope that these things will go away? No, of course not. Having publicly available libraries is what drives me to get up in the morning at 5:30. And I'm happy to do my part and go the extra mile, same as every librarian you've ever met. But people have to be able to use libraries without fear of threats or violence. People have to be able to use libraries without an armed safety officer standing by while they check out books about Palestine. Students have to be able to use libraries by swiping their ID card, which is also their library card here, to check out books about Palestine without fear of their school or the US government tracking their movements. We cannot watch silently as this administration uses Colombia as a pawn in a gargantuan oligarchic chess match. We cannot watch silently as our administration attempts to rush into anticipatory obedience in obeying these whims and dismantling our hard-won forms of shared governance. We cannot watch silently as Colombia tries to put armed police officers with powers of arrest inside our libraries. We cannot watch silently. We must defend the right to study and to read and to teach, and that means we have to be loud. That's right. A librarian this morning is saying, don't shh. Do not shush. We have to be loud. Our professional ethics as library workers, a friend recently wrote as part of the Hands Off campaign. Here's my button. Our professional ethics as library workers dictate that we defend students and researchers' rights to study, learn, gather information, and express their knowledge without threats of kidnapping and deportation. Our libraries and our campus should be safe places for students and their ideas. Hands off our students, free the university, free Palestine. If time permits, I can keep reading. Great. Please tell me when it's time for me to go, but if time permits, I'm happy to list off some of the names of several libraries and archives in Gaza that have been damaged and destroyed since October 2023. You can find the full list that has been tracked by the group Librarians and Archivists with Palestine. Again, that's Librarians and Archivists with Palestine, or sometimes affectionately known as LAP. Shout out to LAP and the tremendous, tremendous efforts that they keep up. So, from librarianswithpalestine.org. Israeli damage to archives, libraries, and museums in Gaza, October 2023 to January 2024, a preliminary report from librarians and archivists with Palestine. Just from the introduction, the destruction of cultural heritage in Gaza impoverishes the collective identity of the Palestinian people, irrevocably denies them their history, and violates their sovereignty. In this report, we offer a partial list of archives, libraries, and museums in Gaza that have been destroyed, damaged, or looted by Israeli armed forces since October 7th, 2023. This report is necessarily incomplete. It is very difficult to determine the status of archives, libraries, and museums in Gaza during the ongoing Israeli bombardment. Current conditions in Gaza, such as the targeting of journalists, frequent communication blackouts, and extensive damage to the built environment, pose an immediate threat to safety. Moreover, archivists and librarians have been repeatedly displaced, injured, or killed, making it more difficult to take stock of the damage to cultural heritage. As a result, it should be assumed that this report represents only a fraction of the extent of damage and death, not a complete picture. Starting with archives and rare books. The Central Archives of Gaza City Hall, Gaza City. Complete destruction from direct shelling, causing a fire which fully destroyed the archives, which contained 150 years of records pertaining to Gaza's history. Omari Mosque and Library, Gaza City. Mosque was completely destroyed, likely including the library. The mosque was built in the 7th century and contained one of the most significant collections of rare books in Palestine, including works dating to the 14th century. Over 200 manuscripts from the library's holdings were digitized in 2022. And there's a link on this website, librarianswithpalestine.org. Moving on to libraries. Atta Library, IBBY Children in Crisis Library, Beit Hanun. Complete destruction. The library was also completely destroyed previously in an Israeli bombing in 2014. The Diana Tamari Sabah Library in the Rashad al-Shawa Cultural Center, Gaza City. Complete destruction by Israeli shelling, including the destruction of tens of thousands of books in the Tamari Sabah Library. The building had been sheltering hundreds of displaced Palestinians. The Edward Said Library, destroyed. Enaim Library, destroyed. Gaza Municipal Library, building caught fire, causing significant damage. Al-Kalima Library and Publishing House, complete destruction. Canaan Educational Development Institute, destroyed, including a community library. Lubud Library, destroyed. Al-Nahda Library, destroyed. Samir Mansour Bookshop and Library, Gaza City, severely damaged. The date of damage listed here is October 10th, 2023. And as I've scrolled past these dates of damage, I'll note that, again, this report was compiled and is up to date as of over a year ago, January 2024. And again, it's difficult to ascertain the current state of all damage and destruction to libraries and archives. Al-Sharuk Al-Dayam Library, destroyed. University libraries, I'll keep going. Al-Aqsa University Library, Gaza City, damaged through fire. Islamic University of Gaza Library, destroyed. Al-Isra University Library and National Museum, near Gaza City, destroyed by controlled detonation by the Israeli military, including the library and National Museum, which contained over 3,000 archaeological artifacts. The museum was looted prior to destruction. Al-Quds Open University Library, Gaza City, damaged. Jawaharlal Nehru Library, Al-Azhar University, Gaza City. University campus was destroyed, though reports do not mention the library specifically. Museums. Akkad Museum, damaged. The museum included about 2,800 artifacts from prehistoric to modern times. The Cultural Carrara Museum, severe damage including the destruction of display cabinets containing archaeological artifacts. Deir al-Balah Museum, partial damage from indirect shelling. Ibrahim Abu Sha'ar Heritage Diwan, southeast of Rafah, destroyed, including an extensive collection of Bedouin heritage. Kudari Museum, damaged. Palestinian Costume Museum, Rafah, destroyed. Al-Carrara Cultural Museum, also known as the Khan Yunis Museum, heavily damaged, including complete destruction of the pottery collection. Museum contains 3,500 archaeological and historical artifacts dating back to as far as 4000 BC. Rafah Museum, complete destruction by airstrikes. Shahwan Museum, damaged. So thank you for this time here to the organizers. Thanks to CU-IMC. And I will now step down and yield the floor to voices from international and public affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, library. Thank you so much, library. Woo! 7:30. We're in for a real treat now. We've got content for a whole hour and a half. They said an hour is not enough. We need an hour and a half. So before they go up, I'm really excited to announce that in the middle of their time at the 8 o'clock hour, we will be at 80% through our speak out. Woo woo! 80% through at the 8 o'clock hour. But we are super excited to introduce these folks. So come on down, SIPA. Whoop whoop! Make your way. Come on down. First speaker. Thank you. That's where. All right.
Yeah. Sure.
Let's go. 7:30. Woo
Sorry, yeah, for this. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, that's like, no, thank you. Can you go? Yeah, can you hold this? No, I need the rest of this. Good morning from Morningside Heights here at Columbia. I'm Daniel Naujoks, and we are voices from SIPA, the School of International Public Affairs. And before I get to our own statements, we want to reiterate the following 6 demands. First, stand up for higher education. Second, fight back against the federal tax. Third, protect and defend students and international scholars. 4, preserve academic freedom, freedom of expression, and Columbia University's autonomy to govern these. Re-establish and affirm tenets of diversity, equity, inclusion. And lastly, protect our researchers, provide backup funding. So, during the 25-hour speak out at Columbia University to defend academic freedom and the safety for students, we are proud to bring voices from the School of International Public Affairs, SIPA. A short disclaimer: we are proud to be part of this collective action, but none of us here speaks in official capacity for the school or for the university. Each person taking the floor speaks for themselves. Endorse each and every statement and demand uttered by others on the stage. Though I dare say, each person standing here today Free school parents stand up and speak out for the threats against academic freedom and for the safety of our students. Academic freedom is under massive attack by the federal government, by other political actors, and by private entities. And university administrations are only slowly, and some say way too hesitantly, speaking out against these attacks. Our students are being intimidated. Our students being kidnapped and illegally detained. Their visas being illegally cancelled. Life-saving and life-altering research at this university, as well as many other places of higher education and research, is being cancelled on a whim, without any legitimate process, let alone with any reason. The government uses lists of hundreds of words as red flags that won't allow researchers to receive government funds if they do use such words. Even George Orwell, writing his dystopian novel 1984, might not have realistically expected this attempt to forcibly direct thinking and research. University programs and institutions that focus on addressing racial injustice as well as systemic racism and discrimination are being outlawed against all evidence, against core ideas of justice. I don't know if it makes things better or worse that these attacks come under the guise of civil rights and as anti-discrimination arguments. On the upside, I'm always happy when a government proclaims the importance of civil and human rights. It is important to stress that universities in this country have human rights obligations. They must implement human rights and civil rights. But abusing these provisions by the government is wrong and dangerous. The attempts of the government to use civil rights as a Trojan horse for attacks that have no relations to civil rights is an attempt of a power grab that needs to be called out for what it is and stopped. We're here to reaffirm the importance of academic freedom. Academic freedom is a key ingredient in a free, just, and prosperous society. The Free to Think report the Academic Freedom Monitoring Project at the Scholars at Risk, an NGO published a few months ago, says, and I'm quoting, around the world, scholars and university students face frequent and pervasive attacks on their academic freedom and the autonomy of the institutions where they work. As Scholars at Risk, annual Free to Think reports have previously shown, particularly in authoritarian societies where the rule of law is weak and dissent is viewed as destabilizing, the right of scholars to research, teach, and speak freely has long been oppressed, including through targeted killings, disappearances, arrests, and prosecution. End of quote. Free to Think, the report documents almost 400 attacks on scholars, students, institutions, 51 countries in the 12 months leading up to June 2024. And overall it observes that societies across the globe are witnessing the erosion of the liberal norms and institutions that bolster academic freedom. I quote, such trends are deeply threatening not just to higher education, but to democracy. Universities are where students learn to be active, engaged members of civic society. As such, autonomous universities' academic freedom, including the ability to ask questions, to safely exchange ideas, are cornerstones of democracy. They are critical to a democratic society as a free press or independent judiciary. Historically, open societies have upheld university autonomy and academic freedom as essential values, but data from the Academic Freedom Index indicates that this is changing. When liberal democracies undermine higher education, they risk exporting their actions to the rest of the world. End of quote. In the last few weeks, academics have been on the back foot to justify why it is important what we do. Colleagues in the medical school conduct research, invent processes, devices, medicines that save lives. Colleagues at the climate school use the latest technology and science to predict how to make sure we all can be fed in the future, how to adjust cities and coastlines so we all won't die. At CEPA, we study public policies and international relations. I teach a course on public policy and policy design. We love government reform. If Doge had come to us for advice, we would have been able to give them the tools to properly analyze and evaluate effectiveness government programs and agencies. We would have provided our expert advice that having people running around with no government experience, running around making instantaneous decisions about what programs to cut without any actual analysis, and let alone participation by affected populations, is not a smart way to reform government. Two of our students on research are currently detained by the federal government. Mahmoud Khalil and Mosa Madawi. They have not been charged with any crime. They have not been charged with any wrongdoing. Both were legal residents. The sole reason they are detained and threatened with deportation is that they demonstrated against atrocities in Gaza. They said the same thing that the Secretary General of the United Nations said. They stressed the same things that the UN High Commissioner of Human Rights stressed. You may not agree with either of these people said, but to outlaw it and to punish a student for doing so is unacceptable. It is a prerogative of the government to set foreign policy goals. If the government decides that to support an ally, whatever they do, including war crimes and crimes against humanity, that, I guess, is their choice. But it is unacceptable to use legally questionable provisions to severely punish students for speaking out against atrocities and against the support of the US. No democratic and rules-based government can use harsh means to shut up such voices. Regardless where you stand on the Israel-Palestine question, any political actor with a conscience needs to stand up and needs to speak out. This is unacceptable for any democracy. This is unacceptable in any state with the rule of law. In 2020, the UN Special Rapporteur on the promotion and protection of the right of freedom of opinion expression issued a report summarizing the protection of academic freedom under international law. The leading NGO on academic freedom, Scholars at Risk, then formed a working group. Sorry, it's raining academic freedom principles. Drafted the principles for implementing the right of academic freedom. I won't read all the 9 principles. I won't read out all the 9 principles here, but I stress the following: academic freedom is the human right to acquire, develop, transmit, apply, and engage with a diversity of knowledge and ideas through research, teaching, learning, and discourse. It is protected by existing international human rights standards and international standards education principles. It requires autonomy of academic research and teaching institutions. And let me stress, importantly, Principle 8. As members of education communities, students have the right to academic freedom. I quote, "States are obligated to respect, protect, and promote the academic freedom of students as members of education communities or in their individual pursuits, to conduct activities involving the discovery and transmission of information and ideas, and to do so with the full protection of human rights laws. Threats to or violation of the rights of students and organized student groups, including by means of suspensions, expulsions, arrests, persecutions, imprisonments, violence, infiltration, surveillance, interference with or dissolution of student associations, unions, and assemblies by state or non-state actors undermine academic freedom." End of quote. I'm concluding. Foreign students and universities are the canaries in the coal mine. They first come for us. But the same tools, narrative and rhetoric, will be used to come after others. We need university leadership, civil society, politicians on both sides of the aisle to stand up for the rule of law, for democracy, and for the safety of all students. Their right to write op-eds, protest, research, report, and express their opinions needs to be upheld, protected. This includes where students write and say things you disagree with, or we might all agree that they are wrong. We are here to speak out for a free society, for the fundamental value of academic freedom, and for the safety of our students. You up next? Thank you. Yeah, all this is mine. This is you.
Good morning. Good morning.
This is for the online more than. Yeah. My pocket. Yeah, wait, one.
Okay. Oh. That's it. Okay. Here we go. Bell Hooks, speaking to Black people moving forward in struggles for liberation, described education as a practice of freedom. She said, "We must confront the legacy of unreconciled grief, the breeding ground for profound nihilistic despair." Her prescription of a love ethic that can overcome the culture of domination is important medicine for us today. When there is more than enough grief and despair to go around, and when trust in institutions has been fractured. In speaking to students, I'm pained by their deep anxiety, fear, depression, and even burnout many are experiencing as a result of the federal attacks and repression by this government, and even before that, by this institution, as many have testified over these hours. Students and their friends' lives and livelihoods are being sacrificed under this pressure. At the same time, look at the evidence of all the courage that remains to put into practice the principles we teach about, including human rights, conflict resolution, and to celebrate, not fear, diversity. In addition to joining with the CU-IMC calls for the Board of Trustees to fight back, I want to also celebrate how many of our students keep pursuing a love ethic and a commitment to apply their education in the world, in their inquiries and actions for racial and gender justice, and to Haiti, for an end to Islamic anti-Semitism. Many of us, students, faculty, and I'm sure administrators too, garbage truck, we'll let it pass.